The most successful propaganda cartoon in American television history won an Academy Award, and you've probably watched it dozens of times without realizing what it was. The Yankee Doodle Mouse, released in 1943, reframes the entire Tom and Jerry chase formula as a military engagement. Jerry bombs Tom with champagne cork artillery. Explosions are painted like battlefield fire. The mousehole is dressed with Allied flags. It's available on streaming right now. It's on the DVD collections. Nobody calls it propaganda. Meanwhile, the wartime-era Tom and Jerry episodes that actually disappeared from modern circulation weren't pulled for being propaganda at all. They were pulled for something that propaganda made normal. The question worth asking is what happened when the US government's information apparatus met MGM's cartoon studio, and why modern television treats the result like two completely separate problems instead of one. Tom and Jerry was created in 1940 by William Hanna and Joseph Barbera at MGM's cartoon studio in Culver City, under producer Fred Quimby. The series was barely a year old when the United States entered World War II. Between 1942 and 1945, while animation studios operated under wartime material shortages, draft-depleted staffs, and new institutional pressures, Hanna and Barbera produced roughly 24 Tom and Jerry shorts. These shorts didn't emerge from creative isolation. They were products of a specific industrial moment when Hollywood's relationship with the federal government had been formalized into something unprecedented in American peacetime. The World War II-era Tom and Jerry shorts were produced within a formal collaboration between Hollywood studios and the U.S. government's wartime information apparatus, specifically the Office of War Information and the War Activities Committee of the Motion Picture Industry, that made both patriotic messaging and racial dehumanization features of the same production process. When modern distributors remove the racial caricatures while preserving the patriotic content, they treat propaganda as a collection of offensive images rather than an integrated system, which fundamentally misrepresents how it operated. Let's start with the system itself. In June 1942, President Roosevelt established the Office of War Information by executive order. Within the OWI, the Bureau of Motion Pictures, headed by former journalist and New Deal Administrator Lowell Mellett, reviewed film scripts, issued content guidance through its Government Information Manual for the motion picture industry, and distributed memos articulating what the government wanted on American screens. This wasn't a suggestion box. Studios that cooperated with OWI guidance received favorable treatment in distribution and access to restricted wartime materials like film stock. Studios that didn't found themselves under government scrutiny in an industry already facing antitrust action. Simultaneously, the War Activities Committee of the Motion Picture Industry coordinated the production and distribution of short subjects designed to support the war effort. This committee, staffed by studio executives, functioned as a pipeline between government priorities and animation production floors. Short subjects were a primary vehicle for this content because they played before every feature film and reached massive audiences. MGM was one of the 5 major studios. Fred Quimby's cartoon division operated within this institutional framework. The documented evidence shows that the U.S. government built an institutional system that shaped Hollywood content during World War II through concrete incentives and coordination, not abstract cultural influence. Studios didn't need to be individually pressured to produce propaganda. The system made patriotic content the path of least resistance and made content contradicting war messaging practically impossible to distribute. Now into this system walk Hanna and Barbera with a cartoon about a cat chasing a mouse. The Yankee Doodle Mouse is the most explicit result. The episode depicts Jerry as an Allied soldier fighting a superior enemy force. The gags reference war bonds. The entire chase structure is militarized. The short won the Academy Award for Best Animated Short Subject at the 16th Academy Awards in 1944, which itself reflects how the industry valued content serving the war effort. But the same production environment produced something else. Blackface gags, the cartoon convention where an explosion darkens a character's face and triggers minstrel show visual coding, appeared in multiple wartime shorts. The Mammy Two Shoes character, a racial caricature voiced by Lillian Randolph, continued through this period. And the broader wartime culture that the WWII actively promoted normalized racial dehumanization as a mobilization strategy. Government propaganda explicitly encouraged portrayals of Japanese people as subhuman, and several studios, including Disney and Warner Brothers, produced shorts that did exactly that. And here's where I need to be honest about what the evidence can and can't prove. No production record documents the WWII specifically reviewing a Tom and Jerry script. The argument that the racial content in these shorts was directly connected to the wartime propaganda system rests on the pattern and the industrial context. The government ran a system that promoted both patriotic messaging and racial dehumanization as propaganda tools. MGM operated within that system. MGM's wartime output included both types of content. The pattern suggests connection. The industrial context makes it likely. But the specific causal links between government guidance and particular gags remain interpretive. If someone produced evidence that WWII guidance never reached the MGM cartoon division, the thesis would need significant revision. The epistemic ceiling here is that the system existed, the content reflects it, but the direct documentary trail connecting specific government notes to specific Tom and Jerry story decisions hasn't surfaced. What I can document is how this content has been treated since. And this is where the story becomes revealing. Modern distribution of the MGM Tom and Jerry library, handled by Turner Entertainment and later Warner Brothers, has involved selective editing of racial content. Episodes featuring Mammy Two Shoes had her voice redubbed by Turner in the 1990s, replacing Lillian Randolph's performance, and in later releases her lower body was digitally removed from the frame entirely. Shorts featuring blackface gags, including Mouse Cleaning from 1948 and Casanova Cat from 1951, were pulled from standard rotation. His Mouse Friday, with its cannibal caricatures, became similarly unavailable. But The Yankee Doodle Mouse, an explicitly patriotic short that reframes cartoon violence as military conflict, produced under the same government studio arrangement, airs freely. It's on streaming. It's on DVD. It's framed as a classic. The practical explanation for this disparity is straightforward. Racial caricature is visibly offensive in ways that patriotic cartoon violence isn't. Of course, distributors cut one and keep the other. But the effect of this selective editing is that it separates two things that were produced by the same system for complementary purposes. And here's the hardest conceptual step, so stay with me. Wartime propaganda worked by creating an emotional environment, not just by delivering individual messages. The enemy is ridiculous and subhuman. That's the racial caricature. Our cause is just and heroic. That's the patriotic messaging. These were not separate categories of content. They were the two halves of a single emotional argument. When modern distributors cut the racial content but keep the patriotic content, they preserve propaganda's emotional payload, the feeling that military action is heroic and exciting, while removing the evidence of how that feeling was manufactured. The strongest counterargument here is that the racial caricatures in Tom and Jerry weren't specifically products of the wartime propaganda system. Mammy Two Shoes debuted before the war. Blackface gags were a standard cartoon convention going back to the silent era. The patriotic content and the racial content were separate phenomena. One was a creative response to wartime culture. The other was just the normal racism of American popular culture. Connecting them to the same government system forces a link the evidence doesn't support. There's real truth in this challenge. Not every racial caricature in every wartime cartoon was mandated or even encouraged by the WWII. The WWII's guidance focused on supporting the war effort. Racial caricature of domestic minorities wasn't part of their explicit mandate, though racial dehumanization of the Japanese enemy absolutely was. But the industrial context matters in a specific way. The wartime propaganda apparatus created a cultural environment where racial dehumanization was treated as acceptable and even patriotic. That framework reinforced a broader culture of racial caricature that was already present in American entertainment. The system didn't need to specifically mandate blackface gags in Tom and Jerry. It needed to create an environment where they were unremarkable, where no one at MGM would question them, where they would survive the production process without objection, where they would reach audiences as normal comedy. That's exactly what it did. So let me narrow the thesis accordingly. The racial caricatures in Tom and Jerry were not created by the WWII. But they persisted and flourished within a production environment that the government's wartime information apparatus deliberately shaped to make racial dehumanization culturally acceptable. The patriotic messaging and the racial caricature weren't the same type of content, but they were products of the same system, serving complementary functions within wartime culture. If this is correct, it means something specific about how propaganda operates. Propaganda doesn't work primarily through individual messages or isolated images. It works through systems that shape what gets produced, what feels normal, and what passes without comment. The wartime Tom and Jerry shorts aren't propaganda because any single gag references the war. They're propaganda because they were produced within an institutional framework that made certain types of content expected, rewarded, and widely distributed, while making other types practically impossible. And it means our current approach to this history, cutting the offensive images while celebrating the rest, doesn't address how propaganda operated. It treats the symptoms while leaving the system invisible. When we watch the Yankee Doodle Mouse and don't recognize it as propaganda, but we cut the blackface gags from other shorts and call the problem solved, we've fundamentally misunderstood what the problem was. The problem wasn't that individual cartoons contained offensive images. The problem was that an entire production system operated in concert to manufacture consent by controlling the emotional content of popular entertainment. The framework for watching animation from this period, or any period, is to ask who made this decision, under what institutional constraints, and what that tells you about what you're watching. The wartime Tom and Jerry shorts weren't just Hanna-Barbera exercising creative freedom. They were products of a specific industrial arrangement between a studio and a government that wanted certain stories told in certain ways. The racial caricatures and the patriotic messaging came from the same system. We can't understand one without the other. The question this analysis opens isn't really about Tom and Jerry at all. It's about what production systems are shaping the content we watch right now, and what we're failing to see because we're still looking at individual images instead of the structures that produce them.